I want to turn now to Professor Robert Kaufmann from Pepperdine University. He's a professor of public policy there. He's also works very closely. He's a current adjunct scholar at the Heritage Foundation, a former Bradley scholar. Has written several books, and I know he's coming out with a new one very, very soon. Professor, before we get into your new book, we just had on the show Reagan biographer Craig Shirley walking through some of the parallels between what we saw with Ronald Reagan's rise in 1980 and the Iranian hostage crisis and the things that he had done with some of the things that Governor Scott Walker is saying and doing right now on the campaign trail that we've seen him do in office leading up to him announcing that he's running for president. And just this past week, Governor Walker wrote a big op-ed for Breitbart called, the headline of it is, everybody should go back and read it if you haven't already, Scott Walker terminate the Obama-Clinton-Iran deal. And in the first sentence in the first paragraph in the op-ed, Governor Walker says that if elected on day one, he's going to get rid of this deal. Tell us what you think of Governor Walker's position on this, and then we'll get into some more of the specifics for the rest of the field.
One, I agree entirely with Governor Walker's position on this. Two, there are, as Craig Shirley pointed out, some real arresting parallels. In 1979, the Carter administration negotiated a disastrous SALT II agreement that encapsulated their worldview that had led the United States into retreat and recession. What Ronald Reagan did was essentially challenge that directly and say, if we remember what made us great in the first place, peace through strength and distinguishing friends from foes, we would see our best days ahead of us rather than behind us. This likely, too, is going to be a historic debate, not just on the particulars of the Iran agreement, but a debate over Obama's entire worldview that literally has resulted in geopolitical and moral disaster. We're beginning to reap the whirlwind of it. If it continues, it's going to get worse. So Governor Walker is very courageous in laying down the gauntlet on this issue in the way he did it.
And so now, can you walk through first, because I know you know the ins and outs of this Iran deal. We're going to get further into it later with more experts, but can you walk through first, what is it about this deal that's so bad? I mean, the president goes out there and says, "Oh, this is going to prevent the Iranian government from obtaining a nuclear weapon." But I mean, walk through for us what is it that specifically about this deal that's bad? What are some of the key major points in it so that people understand what is so bad about what the president has done here?
Sure. There are 3 points that go from bad to worse. Point one, even in the likely event that Iran abides by every provision of this agreement, it leaves Iran within a year of a nuclear breakout capability. Moreover, that will diminish over time. Moreover, it does nothing to regulate its burgeoning missile program. So even if the Iranians abide by it, it basically concedes them a nuclear infrastructure and represents a capitulation on everything Obama initially demanded. That's the least bad news. Then, the agreement is really not verifiable. If you look at the fine print of the agreement, there's not unfettered access. Iran has a dismal historic record of compliance. And under the terms of the agreement, we're going to have to get Iranian acquiescence to have these facilities inspected. They'll also have notice. Even worse than that, even if you detect violations, they're unenforceable, because if you look at the enforcement mechanism, the so-called snapback, the theory is that in the event of Iranian violations, the sanctions would snap back. That's a fiction. It requires 8 countries, including Iran, including Russia, including China, to agree to a snapback. That's the equivalent of the UN Security Council. What's the likelihood that Putin, who's acted as Iran's lawyer, or China, voraciously in need of Iranian energy and anti-American, they're never going to snap back sanctions once the sanctions are lifted. So even in the rare event that we actually detect violations, there'll be no sanctions. Iran will receive hundreds of billions of dollars of aid, be on the threshold of a nuclear breakout in exchange for counterfeit promises. I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post calling this deal Obama's Munich. That's what it is.
And I'm right. I'm Alex Sawyer with the Capitol Hill reporter for Breitbart, and I was actually watching the hearing Thursday when Kerry was testifying in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And something Senator Rubio brought up that I wanted to ask you about was he questioned a certain clause in the deal. I haven't read it. Maybe you can clarify this. That he was worried that the U.S. would have to defend Iran if, for example, Israel was to bomb one of the sites. If Israel didn't live up to the, respect the agreement and went ahead and went after Iran, would the United States then have to defend this agreement and in turn Iran against Israel?
Whether that is true or not, and there's an ambiguity in the language, the larger problem is that the Obama administration has signaled throughout that it's done everything it can to discourage Israel from having the ability to defend itself. The worst thing of all about this agreement, as bad as the particulars are, is the worldview that impelled it in the first place. Obama believes delusionally this is going to be the equivalent of Nixon's opening to China, transforming an enemy into an ally. This is absolutely false and will enable Iran's worst instinct, imperiling every ally the United States has and imperil the United States itself. So while Senator Rubio is right about the ambiguity of the provision, let's keep in mind the larger problem that regardless of the legalities of the language, this agreement will fundamentally undermine Israel's security, and it represents an Obama administration that is now collaborating with Iran against ISIS. That's the equivalent of collaborating with Hitler, the greater danger, against Mussolini. It's fundamentally, strategically, and morally backwards to the detriment of all American interests and principles.
Now, Professor, one of the things that we talked about a little bit before the show, and that we also we had brought up a little bit earlier on the show with our editor in chief and the host of our Saturday morning radio show, was that in an interview yesterday morning on Breitbart News Saturday, was former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee came out and had some really strong comments against this deal. In part, he said that this president's foreign policy is the most feckless in American history. It is so naive that he would trust the Iranians. By doing so, he will take the Israelis and march them to the door of the oven. Now, in response to that, we've got the Democratic National Committee chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz calling for an apology, saying that this is vitriolic rhetoric, saying that the governor's out of line, and that this is an offense to Jewish people. What's your take on this scenario as it's playing out?
Oh, look, this is a smokescreen over semantics. Although I wouldn't have used directly the Holocaust reference, every opponent of this deal, myself included, agrees with Senator Huckabee that this imperils the state of Israel existentially. Benjamin Netanyahu eloquently made the same mistake before Congress. Governor Huckabee has a long record of defending Israel and being a friend of Israel's legitimate security interests. That's a lot more than I can say for President Obama, who has distanced the United States from Israel from day one. What I tell Ms. Wasserman is this: instead of looking at the speck of Governor Huckabee's eye, she should look at the huge beam in President Obama's. The real threat to Israel and the Jewish people is not Mike Huckabee. It is the Obama administration's feckless policy and its underlying rationale. So on substance, if not etiquette, Governor Huckabee doesn't have anything to apologize about legitimately.
Now, one of the other things we talked about before we got on the air was that, one of the things we look at about when we look across the aisle at the Democratic Party, we be expecting there to be some kind of a bipartisan opposition to this deal emerging? The only Democrat who's even said anything really is a guy who's been indicted for, some pretty serious corruption stuff, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, and even his opposition is kind of feckless. There's no real opposition from the Democratic Party emerging. What happened to the Democratic Party? Why are they not standing up to this president in this deal? Why are they not saying no to the Iranian Ayatollah?
Well, this process began during the Vietnam War, where Cold War liberals like Harry Truman, Scoop Jackson, Sam Nunn, Pat Moynihan, who were all patriots and defenders of American power, these people played a major role in the SALT II debate in 1979, joining with patriotic Republicans. This group is now extinct. The last of them, it's my next book project, is Senator Lieberman of Connecticut, who was an honorable hawk, and the Democratic Party essentially has spurned him. So right now, any opposition called Church Reagan is going to happen party, not the Democratic Party. Sad that that's so, but that's the way it is.
And again, folks, this is Breitbart News Sunday. I'm Matthew Boyle, sitting in for Stephen K. Bannon. We're broadcasting live from the Sirius XM Broadcast Center on Capitol Hill. Our guest right now is Pepperdine University professor Robert Kaufmann, who's also the author of the forthcoming book, which will be coming out early next year, The Imprudence of the Obama Doctrine, from the University Press of Kentucky. It's this will be his fourth book. His third book, that In Defense of the Bush Doctrine, is available out there right now. Now, Professor, in the last couple of minutes here, can you kind of tell us where do you think this is going to go? Is there a chance to stop this Iran deal? Are the Republicans in Congress going to be able to get their, collective what together to be able to slow these guys down, or is there is there any hope here to stop this?
Sure, you can stop it. It depends on the form it comes. By rights, this should be a treaty, and a treaty requires 2/3 advice and consent of the Senate, and that means to pass it, Obama would have to have bipartisan support. So Republicans could easily stop that. What I expect is Obama will engage in another act of lawlessness and try to pass this off as an executive agreement rather than a treaty where it belongs. Then the Republicans are going to have to make a battle in Congress. And look, winning is not just winning on the terms of the treaty. It's to lay out a long-term basis for making the election of 2016 a referendum on Obama's foreign and domestic policy and putting the millstone around Mrs. Clinton's neck. The theme is, and what Republicans should use these hearings to do, is to show Hillary Clinton is the first mate on the deck of President Obama's Titanic. If we don't do that as Republicans, we are derelict, and we have no one to blame but ourselves.
All right,
because
Professor,
there's a golden opportunity to do it.
I really want to thank you for taking the time on Sunday evening to call in. Again, folks, our guest here has been Pepperdine University professor Robert Kaufmann. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Blaze News at the top of the hour. We'll be right back after this with State Rep Joe Carr from the great state of Texas.